Okay. I think the majority of us are here. Some people will join, so they'll keep joining in, dropping in. So shalom again. I think everybody knows me here, but my name is Abir Malyanker. I'm the Shaliach and Director of Israel Engagement here at BJ. And today I'm extra excited because we are initiating a special series that I have, that I'm very happy to open it. Just because I think it's, as a shaliach, I have a lot of conversation with people of the community, and a lot of the times the conversation, slowly but surely shift to political stuff and things that's going on, obviously in Israel, or the last current affair in Israel, or something like that. But sometimes we forget to talk and discuss the most common thing between us, between the Jewish population in Israel and Jewish population here, which is our Jewishness, our Judaism, our Torah. And this is why this specific series is so exciting, because it allows us to get a piece of Torah from Israel, and to talk about things that's relevant to all of us in a way, but from the perspective of the Torah and from Israel. So I'm very, very happy to open this series. And to start this wonderful series, we have a special guest. And I want to tell you a little bit about the guest and what he's going to basically teach us today. 1 second. See, more people are coming in. 1 second. I don't know if you see, do you see, one quick question before I start. Do you see if this is being recorded? Because I can't see. It is.
I saw a sign that
it's being recorded, Bill.
Yeah.
It's being recorded.
Okay. So 1 second. Okay. So to start, without further ado, we have our first guest in this series, and every time it's going to be a different teacher. I've been asked here, and please, if you can, mute yourself if you're not talking. It will be a great help, because people are keep hearing you. Okay. We have Rabbi Leo Weinerdor from Israel. Rabbi is going to tell us, all of us, a little bit about himself in a second. I'm sure you all read his bio on the website. I don't want to take much time. I do want to say that this topic that he's going to speak today about rumors and ruined reputation in the era of social media is something that is super relevant to all of us, no matter the age, no matter where we are in life. And this is why I think this particular shiur, this particular lesson is going to be extra interesting. So Rabbi, I want to pass the stage to you, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Avia. It's a pleasure to see you all. Pleasure to be here. If by any chance you're hiding your face and you're able to expose yourself, that's even better, because then I can see more of whom I'm teaching. That's, I understand if you're not able to, but if you are able to, that's better. Thank you. Perfect. So yes, I don't, I'm glad to be able to introduce myself rather than be introduced. It always feels strange to me to have someone talk about me. I'll wait until I'm buried under the ground for that. So I'm originally from Houston, Texas, but it's been a long time since I've lived there. I made Aliyah in 1992, and I did my master's in Jewish philosophy at Hebrew U. And I studied for rabbinic ordination from Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory, and I did a doctorate in philosophy at Bar Ilan University. So those are my professional, or at least my degrees. I also write. I wrote a book called The Going, and I had the Beit Midrash of Kolot, which is actually the teaching that we're going to be doing from. Is emergent from or based on, because last year I led the faculty in coming up with a kind of the halachot of screen use, where we tried to tackle the issue of screens in our lives from a bunch of different angles. This was before Corona, so we might have to add, a whole chapter about the new things that we learned from the reality of Corona. And I'm married to Buria, who's a native of Haifa, and we have 5 children. And that's it. That's enough. That's so I've been here in Israel long enough such that if I don't get interrupted for more than 2 or so minutes, then I feel like it must be because someone's sleeping. So your job is to quickly unmute yourself and ask or issue a comment. This is not going to be a lecture at me while I go do something else kind of hour and 5 minutes, at least of the time that we have left. So if you didn't have your coffee, pour yourself one, because you won't be able to sleep through this, because I'll just get up and leave. So here's what I'd like to do with our time. I want to look at I want to look at 3 issues. All of them, of course, are about under the title that I gave it, Spreading Rumors and Ruining Reputations, the Torah of Social Media. And basically what I want to suggest is that, not surprisingly, it's not only possible, but even important and compelling to take I'm sorry, let me just say one thing. I'm terribly bad at multitasking. So if you have something to say to me, please don't send it in a chat, because I won't really notice it. So okay, now back onto what we're going to be doing. So my basic suggestion / claim, which is not at all novel, is that the Jewish tradition has something to teach us, even in something which might seem as far away from it as how to conduct ourselves in the area of social media, and specifically regarding the issue of how to deal with someone's reputation and spreading rumors about them, what is in social media terms called shaming, or that's one of the terms for it. And basically what I'd like to do is we'll take 3 steps along the path. The first is to look briefly at what is called halbanat panim, embarrassing someone publicly. And we'll just look briefly at a couple of sources, long enough for you to be convinced that I'm not making it up when I say that the Jewish tradition, the classical Jewish tradition, looks very, very harshly at shaming someone publicly and considers that to be a very, very, very grievous offense to commit. The second step will be looking at the topic called Lashon Hara, which we could perhaps call it derogatory speech. And what we'll try to do, mainly by looking at Maimonides, is to unpack the nature of what makes something derogatory speech. And we will be paying special attention to what I'll call, or what Rambam, the Maimonides, calls the 3 the three people involved, which are the person who speaks, the person who is spoken about, and the person who listens to or receives the derogatory speech. And then the final stage, which is, I think, perhaps the most important one, is to bring it together and look at the question of shaming and ask, what are the conditions, in what circumstances do we think, does the Jewish tradition suggest that it's not only possible to shame someone, out them, so to speak, regarding offenses that they've committed, but maybe even necessary. In other words, it's our obligation to out someone in certain circumstances, even if, as we'll see, doing so might have tremendous negative consequences. So that's the arc of our next hour or so. I'll take a brief pause to see if someone wants to ask something at this point. And if not, we'll jump into the texts. I will soon be doing a share screen. Okay, no one's unmuted themselves and burst ahead, so so it's my job to keep going. Okay, so I'll do a share screen now. I'll try to make sure that it's big enough that you can see it clearly, and you'll let me know if that's not working. Let's make sure I'm sharing the right thing. I don't want to let you in any secrets unless you publicly shame me. Just 1 second. Why am I not finding? Just 1 second. Oh, there it is. It's right in front of me. Okay. So here we are. I'm assuming that everyone can see it. If there's a problem, you'll let me know. I'm just going to put you all at the top of my screen, make you a little bit bigger. Okay. Okay, good. So as I said, we're first warming up. I'm just trying to convince you of what I think probably will, in a matter of minutes, you'll say, okay, we got it. We believe you. Let's go on. The first is, and we're going to look at the idea of what is called in Hebrew halbanat panim, which literally means making someone's face white. We would call it in English public embarrassment. So the Rabbi Elazar, the first text, the Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, chapter 3, Mishnah 11, Rabbi Elazar says, and I'm reading he says a bunch of things, but he says, Hamalbim pnei chavero berabim, af al pi sheyesh biyado Torah u'ma'asim tovim, ein lo chelek la'olam haba. That the person, he gives a list of different kinds of sins that even if you have lots and lots of Torah and good deeds in your name at your disposal. You've learned lots of Torah and you've done lots of good things. But if you embarrass someone publicly, then you have no share in the world to come, says Rabbi Elazar of Modi'in. Then don't worry, when we get further, when we go deeper, I'm just laying the groundwork. So that's why we're kind of staying superficial in terms of the texts. We're going to go deeper into texts in the next, but feel free to interrupt with questions. So the next section is a longer piece, which appears in the Babylonian Talmud tractate Baba Metzia, in a section of Talmud that deals with what is called in Hebrew ona'at dvarim, damaging speech, and we read the following piece of Talmud. The Gemara relates that the Tana, the rabbi who recited the Mishnayot and Braitot in the study hall, taught a Braita. It's a teaching of Nachman bar Yitzchak. And then now we're getting to the point. Anyone who humiliates another in public, it's as though he were spilling blood. Right? It's the equivalent of bloodshed. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to him, right? So this younger or less senior rabbi makes this statement in front of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and then Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak replies and says, "You've spoken well, because we see that when the humiliated person blushes, the red leaves his face and pallor comes in its place, which is tantamount to spilling blood." So it's interesting. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak notes the physiological reaction that we often have when we're embarrassed, which is that we turn pale or we turn white. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says to this sage who said that embarrassing someone is like spilling their blood. Yes, there's a physiological correlate to that, which is that the person turns pale. Rav Chama, and now what happens in this section of Talmud, as often happens in the Talmud, is that they start to think associatively. And now that they're on the subject of embarrassing someone in public, they now kind of riff off and bring a bunch of rabbinic statements in that regard. So Rabba Bar Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, it's preferable for a person to engage in intercourse with a woman whose married status is uncertain and not to humiliate another in public. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan says it is better to perhaps commit adultery than it is to humiliate someone publicly. In just a minute, I'm going to be quiet and ask y'all to unpack these statements, because the way that I read Talmud is I assume that when they make these outlandish statements, they're trying to get the gears in our head moving. They want us. They very, very deliberately pick the outlandish statements that they make in order to get a point across. So our job as attentive readers of the Talmud is to ask, what is the point? Why are they saying that thing, right? In other words, he didn't. So we've now just noticed, we've now had embarrassing someone publicly compared to killing someone, spilling their blood. And Rabbi doesn't exactly compare it to sleeping with another person's spouse, but basically says you're better off doing that or taking a risk on that than you are of embarrassing someone public.
Can I ask a question, please?
And Malzut, yes,
It's
please.
Dova. Sorry, I can't show my video right now.
That's all right. It's all right. Go ahead, please.
So it seems to me that they're saying something other than shaming a person, because when actually someone is shamed or someone is embarrassed, you blush, as is in the translation, which is that more blood comes to your face as opposed to less. So I'm wondering whether they're really saying what you just said, which is that it's tantamount to killing someone, which in which case someone's blood would obviously leave their face.
Right. So that's a great question. I think that I think that there's actually often two stages of blushing. The first is the red and then the white. That is to say that we first blush and it turn red. And then there's a kind of, how should I say it, higher level or deeper level of embarrassment when, often what I think of is, and I'll ask each of us really I think this is what we need to be doing when we learn a piece of Talmud, is we need to be asking ourselves where it meets us and how it's resonant with our experiences. And what I would just say is that I think that it's often the case, from my experience at least, right, when I've been embarrassed publicly, basically, I just want to die. Like, by which I mean, at that moment, if I'm in a public place and I've been embarrassed, and by the way, I didn't mention this in my biography, but I've got 4 older brothers. So like my entire childhood was being embarrassed by my older brother. So I've had lots and lots of opportunities at this. But basically I just want to be somehow zapped into some other reality. Just take me out of this place right now, somewhere else. I do not want to exist here. So what I would say, Dova, is that I think that there's a kind of first blush and second blush. And the first blush is blushing, I turn red. And the second blush is I turn white, like I want to just die and get out of here. But your question is better than my answer, I think. Okay, and Marzutra Bar Tuvia. I'm back into the final paragraph that we're going to read in this text. Marzutra Bar Tuvia says, in the name of Rav, and some say there's different traditions says this. Rav Hana Bar Bizna says it in the name of Rabbi Shimon Chasida, and some say Rabbi Yochanan says it in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But here's whoever says it, here's what they say. It's more comfortable for a person to cast himself into a fiery furnace than to humiliate another person in public. to avoid being cast into the furnace. From where do we derive this? From Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Yehuda, which was last week's, just yesterday's Torah portion. When she was taken out to be burned, she did not reveal that she was pregnant with Judah's child. Rather, she left the decision to him to avoid humiliating him in public. As it is written, and Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burnt. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law saying, I am pregnant by the man to whom these belong. And she said, examine these. Whose are these? The signet, the cords, and the staff. So if you happen to have either know the story or have heard it last night, I'll just say that Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Yehuda, and she dresses up as a whore because he hasn't made good on his promise to marry his third son off to her. And he does not recognize her, and she takes his ring and so forth as collateral. And when it becomes public that she is pregnant, they are going to put her to death, to throw her into the fiery furnace. And rather than say, no, it was you, Yehuda, it was you, my father-in-law, who got me pregnant, she just says, I was made pregnant by the person to whom these things belong, which is him. So she basically makes him fess up to it rather than to shame him or call him out on it. And so from that, the teaching is brought that it's preferable to cast yourself into a fiery furnace than to publicly avoid humiliating someone. Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share for a second. I'm going to take a pause and ask whether anyone wants to say something, excuse me, about any of these texts regarding the severity of embarrassing someone publicly.
I want to say
Yeah,
something.
go ahead, Eleanor. Sure.
So I would have liked to read the first text again because I wasn't sure that I read it correctly when it said, I thought it said that may he have peace in the world to come that was confusing.
He has no share in the world to come. The person, Rabbi Elazar, here it is. I brought it back up onto the screen. He says, there's a bunch of things that you do, one of which is embarrassing someone publicly. And if you've done that, it matters not how much Torah you've learned and whether you've committed, because you will not have a place in the world to come.
So it's talking about Avraham here when it says, may he rest in peace.
No, he says, basically, I skipped over part of what he says, but we can read it all briefly and so that you understand the context. He says, anyone who profanes sacred things, and anyone who despises the festivals, the holidays, or someone who embarrasses someone else's publicly, or someone who annuls the covenant of Abraham, or someone who is contemptuous to Torah, any of those 5 or 6 categories,
he has not a share.
That person will not have a place in the world to come.
And I have one more question, Rabbi, about Tamar.
Sure.
So Tamar first tricks and cajoles and tries to entrap her father-in-law first. Seems pretty nasty. Then she gets evidence. Then she lies about it. And then she doesn't humiliate. Now we can see it as a tikkun, perhaps. I mean, I'm asking you, the Talmud Chacham, the question,
Right.
Like, how do I look at that? She's a nasty bitch, and all of a sudden she follows our tradition to not humiliate, sort of.
Right. So what I would say, I don't want to go too far. It's a good question. I don't want to go too far down the road. I'll just say this. I think that Tamar is a victim of a patriarchal society, and she is using the very, very, very limited means that she has at her disposal in order to leverage her position. So doing what she can do. And I think that, it's kind of, how should I say it? She's conducting guerrilla warfare with a sense of dignity and respect. That is to say, it is what is called, it's what's called, asymmetrical warfare in terms of how much power she has as a woman versus her father-in-law. And so she's, and even despite that lack of symmetry, she's conducting herself with dignity. That's the way I would say it, but that's a longer discussion. Yeah, go ahead. I saw that is your name. I don't know if your name is Shelley, but that's what it says.
Yes, that's me.
Go ahead.
That's me. It is.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that on a personal level, there was a number of years ago, someone was telling us that she in her college, a professor was fired, and he was fired for very serious charges relating to a charge by a student that he was making a sexual suggestive comments. And it turned out that he used to always have gatherings of young females at his home, and he would be teaching them ethical issues. And the bottom line was, he ended up suing to get his job back. He was humiliated. He was fired. He did win 5 years later, but it was way too late to do anything to his reputation. It turned out that his daughter, many years when she was a student, had been raped. And he was trying so hard. He had this sensitivity towards young women in the college. He wanted to, always talk to them about these issues. And this one student took it the wrong way. He was humiliated. He was fired. And it just, after that incident, I heard that I bought the Chafetz Chaim book to read how not to humiliate someone.
Oh, we'll get there. Yes.
Yeah, I know. But that was really a very serious thing that happened. It shows you got to be careful when you say something in public.
Yes. What I would say regarding the obligation to be careful is that we're under a heightened obligation now. That is to say that the ease with which we can now reach a tremendous number of people, and the depth of the temptation, or the opacity of the sources, like where once upon a time, right, you would read something in a newspaper, maybe there was a rumor mill, but you would read something in a newspaper, and by the time that it had to jump through certain hoops to be printed, that of course didn't make it true, but there was at least usually a more thorough process than there is now, and now the ease with which anything can be posted and shared makes it very, very difficult. So that kind of story obviously is unfortunately not at all uncommon now. So I want to now close this first section and go ahead and look at the second section, which is the topic of lashon hara, of derogatory speech. So we're going to, I'll do a screen share again. We're going to join Maimonides, his Mishnah Torah, in what is called the Book of Opinions, Hilchot Deot. And we're going to join, I'm going to join in the middle of, we're in chapter 7. I'm going to join in the middle of Halacha 3. And if you see where my cursor is, it's the fourth line here at the very end of the fourth line. It says, there is yet an extremely grosser iniquity. Do you see where I am? Yes. Okay, good. So after he's mentioned what gossip is, which doesn't interest us right now, he gets to the subject of lashon hara, of derogatory speech, and this is interesting. He says there's an extremely grosser iniquity, which too is included in the prohibitive commandment of gossip, and that is the evil tongue, lashon hara, right? Derogatory speech, one who spreads scandal about his fellow, even though he be telling the truth. Say, notice, please, right, that the Rambam is saying that he's saying that lashon hara, slanderous speech, or derogatory speech, I should say, can be telling the truth. If he be lying, if you're spreading negative things about someone and you're lying and not telling the truth, he's called a maligner who invents an evil name against his fellow. The owner of an evil tongue, behold him, he sits in company and relates, saying, thus and such did that certain party, thus and such were his parents, and thus and such I did hear about him. And of course, he relates scandalous matters. Of him, the verse says, may the Lord cut off all flattering lips, the tongue that speaketh proud things. Okay, I'm going to keep reading, and then at the end of this next section, we'll stop and discuss. The sages said, there are 3 transgressions which call forth retribution for the man who perpetrates in this world and disinherit him from a share in the world to come. They are idolatry, adultery, and bloodshed. But the evil tongue outweighs them all. Right? So lashon hara, the evil tongue, is tantamount to or outweighs idolatry, adultery, and bloodshed. The sages, moreover, said, the person who speaks with an evil tongue is like a heretic, for it is said, who have said, our tongues will make us mighty, our lips are with us, who is Lord over us? And again, the sages said, the evil tongue kills 3 persons, the one who speaks it, the one of whom it is spoken, and the one who receives it. In fact, the greatest harm comes to the one who receives the evil report. Okay, so I want to stop there for a second and see what questions or insights Maimonides' definition of lashon hara, of derogatory speech, raises for you. Any thoughts or reactions? Any surprises? Yes, go ahead, Achsa. Unmute yourself, sorry, or I'll unmute you. There you go.
Just
Great,
one
perfect.
comment. It's like it's a mass murder. It's not just one. It's
Good. Oh,
self, the other person, and the one, or how many people hear it. It spreads. Maybe.
right, good. That's an important comment, which just one second, Judith. That's an important comment that also, even though we skipped over it, I'll just backpedal and show you the first section of that little, the first sentence of that little section. Who is a gossiper? One who loads himself up with matters and goes from this one to that one, saying to each, such did this man say, and I've such and such have I heard concerning that person. Even though it be true, behold him, he destroys the universe. So he's actually playing off of the Hebrew. If you notice, the third word in the Hebrew is rachil, which is in Hebrew, gossip is called rechilut. But a peddler, someone who goes and sells things from one place to another, is a rochel in Hebrew. So Maimonides is playing off of the fact that what it means to gossip is to take things from one place to another and kind of sell it, so to speak. And so I think that, and as you mentioned, right, and as I pointed out just when I started reading the section on lashon hara, he says that lashon hara is a subset of gossip, of rechilut. So, and I think that what it has in common is exactly that point that you just made. Judith, did you want to say something or ask something? Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's not something like eye-opening, but this is all eye-opening to me, because it's what you're describing is that speech, whether it's social media, whether it's text, whether it's written, whatever, is more dangerous than almost any other act we can commit. And we are so free with it at this point in so much of the world that it's sort of like an aha, and takes me back that we have to think about every word we put down and how it can be received. It's the burden is on all of us somehow.
That's right. Yeah, I think that that's a very, very important point. There's something, I mean, I live in Jerusalem. So my youngest son, my youngest son is in 7th grade now, but when he was in elementary school, we used to pass on the way to on the way to his school pass. For those of you who've been to Jerusalem, we would go along the Tayelet, the promenade, and so we had this kind of commanding view to the old city, which occasionally I would look up and think to myself, my God, from all over the world to cut, but it's just like every day. And when something's every day, it's almost impossible for it not to lose its value. And that is, I think, the greatest lesson that the rabbis are teaching us about speech, which is exactly what you said, which is that it is so present. I mean, that is how that is our lifeline. It's our lifeline, literally, right? Because it is what my doctorate was on a philosopher by the name of Franz Rosenzweig, a German Jewish philosopher, and his basic claim. I mean, he had lots of claims, but one of his central claims was that speech is revelation. And I think what he meant by that is that literally it is revelation. It is through speech that what is inside is now revealed. It is, in other words, I had some thought or feeling prior, a moment ago, and I opened up my mouth and I turned my tongue in a certain way and I blew air out and words came out. And now what was inside is now, it now has a palpable reality, and it's now you've heard it, and now you've taken it with you. And so in that sense, it is, and Rosenzweig meant it literally. I mean, he thought that revelation, and so I say that because there is a way in which that is what connects us to the world. And even in these days, these harrowing days when we can't touch people, and we can't hold someone's hand or give a stranger or a friend, not a intimate friend, a hug, we are still being connected by speech on a regular basis, and without that, the loneliness would be insurmountable, right? And so, but as a function of, as a result of that, because it's an everyday thing, we often don't behold it. We don't look at its amazing power, and at its and when anything has power, it can be either a power of building, or it can be a power of destruction. Now, anyone who has had something negative said about them or printed about them knows how powerful that is when you walk into a room and something has been said about you, and now that it's too late, right? As Shelley said, you can print a retraction, but it's way too late for that, right? In other words, because a lot of people have already gone running with it, and their minds about you are made up, and that now is a reality. And that means, right, if I say something, if someone says something to you, oh, Leon, he's a real SOB, I saw the way he treated his children, or I don't know what. Now I come and I want to teach all Torah, but you have no choice other than to have in your head whatever thoughts or things you heard about me when I'm speaking, right? And it's not your fault, it's just there now. Right. So it's a truly powerful thing. And because it is so common, I think that we often underestimate its power. Okay. So I want to now get to what I would call the heart of what we're going to learn tonight.
I think
tonight for
Myra
me.
also raised her hand.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Abil. Go ahead.
Hi.
Sorry, I missed that. Thank you.
Sorry, my camera isn't working. I wanted to ask
That's okay.
if there was a distinction made between very mild statements and very severe statements. There are sort of some comments you might almost call trivial,
Right.
like when your child says, "Mommy, is that lady pregnant, or is she just fat?" Or
Right.
severe things like, "Oh, he's lying on his resume." And also, I noticed the text isn't on the screen anymore, but there was also a reference to even if
Here, I'll
something
fix that.
is true. Now,
Yes, that's the second thing that Rambam says. Yeah, go ahead.
well, like in American law, we say truth is a defense to defamation, that it's
Right,
okay
right.
if it be true. So I'm wondering if we're going to look a little at the content of,
Good,
of the speech.
good.
Thank you, Abir.
Good. So thank you, Myra. First, let's start with thank you, Abir, for pointing it out that I missed Myra's question. And let me it's a great question. Let me divide my answer into two. The first is I'll say that it is regarding the severity of what you say. What I would say is the following. The severity of, and this will maybe transition us to the very last thing that the Rambam said, that there's, he points out, and this is he's basing himself. I'm just going to quickly share it again so that you see it. The very final thing that we read that Rambam says here is that the evil tongue kills three persons: the one who speaks it, the one of whom it is spoken, and the one who receives it. So he's pointing out, this is based on a midrash, but he's pointing out that that it is an inimical force for three different people. The person who speaks the Lashon Hara, the person about whom it is spoken, and the person who receives it, which is now the reason I point that out here is because in response to what you asked, Myra, is that at a certain level, it is up to that person who is spoken about to figure out or to determine how serious it is, right? In other words, if I say about someone, oh God, he's not the sharpest tool in the sharpest knife in the drawer or whatever. I might not have meant it as a terrible insult, but that might be touching that person's greatest insecurity. If I say someone, if I say about someone else, he's a moderately generous with his tzedakah, that may be what prides himself on most, right? And so to hear that is just terribly destructive. So my only point is to say, I mean, it's clearly the case that things have greater impact, and we're going to get to Shelley mentioned the Chafetz Chaim. We'll get to the Chafetz Chaim at the end, assuming I keep pushing on. And there obviously we can, in our world in which everything is monetized, we could monetize, let's say, someone's financial loss based on a damage to their reputation in certain circumstances. But really, the rabbis in the same section of Talmud that we were just reading from before we were on the Rambam, when I mentioned the rabbinic idea of ona'at dvarim, of damage, of hurtful speech, that whole discussion about speech comes in the context of deceitful business practices. That is to say, they are connecting and transitioning from the area of business to the area of someone's reputation and the way that you speak about them. So that's a long-winded way of saying your first question. It's hard. Like on the one hand, you're right. We could distinguish. On the other hand, at a certain level, it's up to the person about whom that speech is spoken to be the one who determines. Regarding the second comment about whether it's true, all I can say is you're right, but it might be true, right? If I say about someone, and I'm mentioning this on purpose because I remember the way that it impacted me when I heard about someone who was a great Torah scholar. I heard it stated about them that they had cheated on their spouse. And when I say that person is a great Torah scholar, I don't even know what the meaning of that sentence means. In other words, I don't know what it means to be a great Torah scholar if one is cheating on one's spouse. What I mean to say is that person is very knowledgeable in terms of Torah, is able to quote a lot of Torah, but might not be living their life in an exemplary Torah fashion. Now, it might be the case that person did, in fact, cheat on their spouse. It might also be the case that person did tshuva. I don't know. I also don't know the story, right? In other words, so all I mean to say is what the Rambam is saying is that there is something called, and the Rambam is basing himself on a section of Talmud, which asks what exactly is lashon hara, damaging speech, and then they give a bunch of different examples, arguments of rabbis with one another. If you say that there's always smoke coming from that home because they're always cooking something. And then Abaye, one of the Rava, says that. And then Abaye says in response to him, well, but wait a second, you're just stating a fact. That's just a fact that they're always, but so Abaye says it depends how you say it. If you say it in a way that kind of is egging the listener on to think, oh God, they're gluttonous. In other words, it's not just whether it's factually true, but the way that you couch it, right? So all I mean to say, I can't resolve or answer your question in any kind of definitive way. All I can say is it's complicated, which, as it is the case, I'm sorry, Shelley, I hope you'll forgive me. I want to just get to the next section because I'm aware of the time, and then hopefully there will be time at the end, which is what I called the next section. The next section I call is of our exploration. I called It's Complicated. I called it It's Complicated because I now want to, so far, I think, let's say our takeaway, if we have a takeaway so far at this, up to this point, we would say, okay, it's bad to embarrass someone publicly, bad to speak lashon hara. Okay, got it. Thank you. We can finish our exploration, except that it's not so simple. It's not so simple because as we know, sometimes, right? Shelley told a story in which the professor wasn't a sexual predator, but there are plenty of stories where the person is a sexual predator, where the person is harassing someone or has harassed someone, and either because we want to prevent it from happening again, or because we think that person deserves to have their name dragged out in public for what they did, or there might be some other considerations. We might say, no, we think that we need to, not only do we not have to refrain from saying it, we actually are obligated to speak out. So now it starts to get complicated. So what I want to do is I'm going to fly through a story, a Talmudic story. You'll raise your hand or ask a question if a detail is unclear. And then once we get through the whole story, it's a wacky story, I'm just warning you. Once we get through the whole story, we'll kind of try to process it in the context of it's complicated. Okay, so here we go. There was a certain Torah. Oh, I didn't start the screen share. I started it and stopped it. Just one second. Okay, here we go. There was a certain Torah scholar who gained a bad reputation due to rumors about his conduct. Now, obviously, that's all they're telling us right now. We don't know exactly what he did. Okay. And of course, it's, how should I say it? It's intentional that the person who writes this story, I mean, what everyone wants to know right now is, what did they do? What did he do? But we're not told that. Okay, so Rav Yehuda said, what should be done? To excommunicate him is not an option. The sages needed him as he is a great Torah authority. Not to excommunicate him is also not an option, as then the name of heaven would be desecrated. I'm going to take a pause now and just point out here the quandary that Rav Yehuda says, right? Rav Yehuda says we're in a bind right now. And the bind is that this person is unquestionably, quote unquote, a great Torah scholar in terms of their knowledge. And we need that person's expertise. Try to think for a second right now, let's say, of someone who's a great surgeon or a great economist or whatever it is, right? Imagine a world in which you could say, okay, the person's got a terrible ethical conduct, but they're very good at what they're doing professionally. You can, at least imagine a sentence like that, even if you don't want to have that person be the person you're sharing an office with, right? So Rav Yehuda says we're in a quandary now because we need this person as a Torah scholar. But if we use this person as a Torah scholar, God's name is profaned, right? In other words, what that means is that everyone is going to say, oh, this is how Torah scholars act, right? This is the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going. That's the quandary. We're gonna go and see what happens. Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabba Bar Bar Chana, have you heard of anything with regard to this issue? Meaning, like, what am I supposed to do? He said to him, Rabbi Yochanan said as follows: what is the meaning of the verse, for the priest's lips should keep knowledge and they should seek Torah at his mouth, for he is a messenger, malach, of the Lord of hosts? This verse teaches that if the teacher is similar to an angel, a malach of the Lord, then seek Torah from his mouth. But if he's not pure and upright, then do not seek Torah from his mouth. Even if he's knowledgeable about Torah, do not learn from him. So Rabbi Yochanan, so based on this statement, I'll keep reading. Based on this statement, Rabbi Yehuda ostracized the Torah scholar. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Baal Bar Chana, what am I supposed to do given this quandary? Rabbi Baal Bar Chana quotes a teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that based on this verse from Malachi, we learn that if the Torah scholar is like an angel, then you should learn Torah from that person's mouth. And if not, then don't. And so Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, so basically I have to kind of quote unquote defrock him, right? I'll ostracize him, in which case he's now an outcast, right? And everyone's going to know, obviously, in terms of how this is plugging into our learning session, that means that everyone's going to know. If someone is ostracized, let me just say, if you don't know anything about the laws of what's the word, ostracization? Is that a word? Then what that means is that the person is publicly calumniated. They are distanced from. They are not engaged. It is the equivalent of shaming someone. Everyone knows it. That person is no longer acknowledged or received publicly. Their reputation is irredeemably blemished, at least insofar as they are still being ostracized. It is possible, as we'll see in a moment, to remove that person's the status of that person is ostracized. So based on the statement, Rabbi Yehuda ostracized the Torah scholar. In the end, after it passed, Rabbi Yehuda took ill and was on the verge of death. The sages came to inquire about his well-being, and the ostracized scholar came along with him as well. Rabbi Yehuda saw him, and he laughed. The ostracized scholar said to him, was it not enough that you excommunicated me, but now you even love me? Rabbi Yehuda said to him, I wasn't laughing at you. Rather, I'm happy as I go to that other world that I didn't even flatter. I wasn't sycophantic towards a great person like you, but instead I treated you fairly in accordance with the halakha. Rav Yehuda died. The ostracized scholar came to the study hall and said to the sages, release me from the degree of ostracism. The sages said to him, there's no one here as eminent as Rav Yehuda to release you from the ostracism. Meaning, if Rav Yehuda, who was the greatest, one of the three greatest scholars of his generation, is the one who ostracized you, we need someone of comparable status in order to remove your ostracized status. So you should go to visit Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya in Eretz Yisrael, and only he can release you. That scholar came before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya said to Rabbi Ami, go and examine his case. If necessary to release him from his ostracism, release him on my behalf. Rabbi Ami examined his case and thought at first to release him from his ostracism. But Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani rose up on his feet. If the maidservant in the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi once ostracized another person, and the sages didn't relate frivolously to her degree of ostracism and didn't revoke it until 3 years had passed, all the more so with regard to a degree of ostracism placed by Yehuda, our colleague. We must take it seriously and not release this scholar. So Shmuel Bar Nachmani steps up and said, we have to leave the ostracism in place. Rabbi Zeira said, what caused this elder, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, to come before us in the study hall today, though for many years he didn't come, and now he comes precisely during this discussion? Learn from this that it is not necessary to release him from his decree of ostracism, as this combination of events is certainly not a coincidence. Rather, it should be viewed as an instructive sign from heaven. Consequently, Rabbi Ami did not release him from the ostracism, and the ostracized scholar left in tears. So what we have this stage, we're not done with the story yet. There's a final stage. What we have at this stage of the story is a scholar who's been ostracized by the greatest scholar of the generation, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda dies. And so the scholar thinks, okay, now they can remove my ostracism. And the answer, and so he goes and basically files an appeal, what we would call, to have that decree removed. And the answer is given to him, no, we're not willing to do it. You still have to serve time. You still have to be publicly shamed. And he leaves the Beit Midrash in tears, crying. Okay, we're going to finish the story off now, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. And this is where I told you it was an odd story. This is where it gets very odd. A wasp came and stung the ostracized scholar on his penis, and he died. Because he was a great Torah scholar, they took him into the caves in which the pious are interred in order to bury them there. But the caves did not accept him. A snake stood at the entrance of the caves and did not let them pass. Then they took him into the cave of the judges, and they accepted him. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that he was accepted there? And it answers, even though he sinned, he still acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eli. As it is taught, Rabbi Eli says, if a person sees that his evil inclination is gaining control over him and he cannot overcome it, then he should go to a place where he is not known. He should wear black, and he should wrap his head in black as if he were a mourner. Perhaps these changes will influence him so that he will not sin. And even if these actions do not, he should at least do as his heart desires in private and not desecrate the name of heaven in public. Okay, that is the end of the story. So, yeah, quite a story, I know. So, so I want to suggest that there's a lot here to learn from regarding shaming, when it's right, how's right to do it, and what are the costs of doing it. So let's try to unpack the story for a couple of minutes before we get to the final text. What do you have to say? Shaming from this story, when is it right? What are the reasons, the compelling reasons to do it? When is it not right to do it? And what are the costs? Or if you have questions about or other questions about the story, go ahead. Go ahead, Eleanor.
The story freaks me out. It's a depressing.
Why? Say more.
Because there's no teshuvah available for the person who has been humiliated and asking forgiveness.
Yeah.
Is one. Two,
Yeah.
I'm very concerned. This is the first time that the Talmud stories, they don't give usually any room for the unconscious. I know often, or by the way, for someone who doesn't have intention, I mean, we were very easy to find legal opinions on what's right and what's wrong with Lashon Hara and humiliating and all this stuff. But sometimes people have impulses that are unconscious and they can learn, they can do better.
Okay, great. So, yeah. So here's what that's perfect. Here's what I'd like to say. First of all, I think that, let me I want to relate to two comments. The first is regarding the question of whether whether this is a bleak story without any hope, and the second is whether this story gives place for the unconscious. So regarding whether it's a bleak story, I actually have two answers. At one level, I would say, well, of course it's a bleak story because when a person's reputation is ruined, then damage has been done. And when that has happened, that's happened, right? And so I think at some level, what I would say is, the Talmud is, I think, in that sense, being realistic, meaning when someone's reputation has been horribly damaged, then that's been done. It's very, very hard to undo it, right? That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that there is a little bit of a reprieve, which is that at least he gets buried with the judges. He doesn't get buried with the righteous or the Hasidim, but he gets buried with the judges. Meaning, if we go back to the opening statement of Rabbi Elazar Modai in Mishnah Avot, which says that the person who has, even if the person has Torah learning and good deeds, they've got no place in the world to come. This person gets a proper burial, not an A+ burial, but a burial, and a burial with judges. Now that leads to the second question about the unconscious. What I would say is, I would actually take issue. I would say that what this story tells us is that they're aware of the in this particular case. I think that what he did wrong was some kind of sexual offense. And I think that's why the wasp stings him on this. And I think that's why it's a snake. That's why it's a snake that's there at the cave, which is often a phallic symbol. That would be my, this is a literary reading. We could, if we had more time, we could try to unpack it, but I think that that's what's going on. And what I would say is that they're aware of the fact that people have sexual fantasies and sexual and sexual impulses, and they say, first, try to control them. Regulate yourself. Try to set yourself up in a situation where you are least likely to play out those fantasies. Put on black clothes. See if you can't create a situation where you won't give into your impulse. And then if you're not able to do that, then at least, and there's a kind of, okay, well, if you can't do that, if you can't totally overcome it, then at least go to a place where you're in private, so that you're not, so that you don't defame God's name. So and the reason that I think that that's important is because I think that they're saying, in a certain sense, we recognize, that you have, quote unquote, limited control, but you still have to you still have responsibility for your actions and their impact. So that would be my, now, all of that being said, I would just like to affirm and embrace the Talmudic, this is not a Hollywood ending impulse, which is to say, one of the things that I love most in the Talmud is that it doesn't try to whitewash things and give us a happy ending. It gives us, all of human complexity with all of its juiciness and all of its and all of its ugliness and all of its contortedness. So I think that's, I think that this rabbi is a kind of, he's unnamed and we don't know exactly what he did, but he's paying a price. He's paying a price. Other comments or thoughts about what this might teach us about Lashon Hara, about ostracizing someone, about shaming someone? Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie, please.
Thank you. So I have a question about this story. In this teaching, it teaches that, this ostracized scholar, it goes up the chain of command to like the highest rabbi in the land to make the decision. But in our society today, we all stand in judgment. Like, who stands in judgment whether someone is deserving of outing, what we call it? And in social media today, so I'm thinking of like specific sites that I sometimes see, like Anti-Semitism Cow and Stop Anti-Semitism, that specifically out people for anti-Semitic acts, and there are other sites to do it for other acts. Like, is there a role for that? And I guess who stands in judgment?
Yes. Yes. That's, yeah. If the this little section was, it's complicated. So you're pushing us to the, it's even more complicated section of our discussion. And what I would like to say is that, there's something beautiful about decentralized authority, and there's something chaotic and dangerous about decentralized authority, right? In other words, it's both. And actually what I'd like to do is maybe spend the last few minutes, based on your comment, going at least to the final text, which is the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, who wrote this this entire book on speech and how we should talk and so forth, and Lashon Hara. And he's very, very pietistic. It's a lot of suggestions are difficult because a lot of the things, sometimes when you're reading it, you kind of feel like silenced, I think. But I think that given what you asked, Stephanie, it's very, very important, because he offers here something. He offers 7 principles here that I want to go through, because I think that they're helpful in terms of helping us process something. So he says, we'll read through it briefly, and then we'll have time for a few questions. If a person saw someone harming his friend, whether robbing him, wronging him, or causing him damage, whether the one robbed or caused damage knew of it or not, or if he shamed him or aggrieved him or wronged him with words, and it became known to him clearly, meaning that the original person, right? If A sees B doing damage to C, and it becomes known to A clearly that he, the B, the perpetrator, didn't return the theft or reimburse him for the damage, and didn't beseech him to forgive his transgression, even if he saw this thing by himself, he can relate it to others in order to help the one who is wronged and to condemn these evil deeds before other people. But he must make care that there will not be lacking the following 7 details, which we will now explain. So let me just make sure that we're all on the same page. He's saying, if I see, let's say Stephanie sees Leon do something to Abir. Okay, so I'm making myself the perpetrator so that, no one leaves this and says Abir did such and such. Okay, so Stephanie sees Leon do something to Abir, and Stephanie knows that I didn't seek Abir's apology, I didn't amends, I didn't do anything, and Stephanie saw it and is sure of it. And that by relating it, passing it on, will either Abir or will help other people by knowing, stay away from Leon or whatever. He says you can pass these things on, you can share it with some following conditions. And now he's going to spell out the conditions. Okay. Now I'll do the share screen again. Okay. Number 1, that he see the thing himself and not hear of it from others, unless it become clear to him afterwards that the thing is true, right? So Steph had to have seen me do it. It's not enough to have heard it based on rumor, unless somehow she gets to a level of certainty that I did it that's tantamount to having seen it herself. Number 2, that he take great care not to immediately determine to be theft or wronging or damage and the like without carefully analyzing whether it actually is theft or damage according to the deen, according to the law. Meaning it's not enough to know something bad happened, but you actually have to, now Stephanie, let's say I'm continuing with the example. She's not a judge, a sanctioned judge, but she has to somehow do her best about whether this is meeting the legal standards of what that, or the objective standards of what that offense is. Number 3, that she I'm going to already change the gender, right? That she reprove the sinner first, gently. Perhaps the proof will avail him, and he will thereby rectify his ways. And if he does not listen to him, then he should apprise the people of this person's guilt, how he deliberately harmed his friends. So she has to first, it can never be a substitute for trying to become involved directly in keeping me from doing that sin. Okay. And only then, if she can do, if she has tried that, then she can notify people of that. Number 4, to not exaggerate the wrong beyond what it is, right? Don't add to it. Number 5, that she should intend the benefit of others and not, God forbid, to benefit herself from the taint that she ascribes to me, and not out of the hatred that she has for me before, right? In other words, it can't be that she's going to somehow benefit from this, and benefit either because someone will say, oh, wow, thanks, Stephanie, you're amazing. Thanks for giving me the heads up on that jerk, Leon. Or because she already hated me, she can now kind of revel in the fact that more people are hating me now. Number 6, if she can bring about the desired benefit itself without recoursing to exposing him for his act, then in all instances is forbidden to speak of what he did. Meaning, if you can be effective without doing that, then that's preferable. And finally, you should not cause the one spoken about more damage than he would suffer if the matter were brought to a Beit Din, to a court. Meaning, let's say I would have to pay a fine of $100,000 for having committed this offense. Then I should make sure that my saying bad things is commensurate to that. Now, I want to stop by saying I think that we don't have time to unpack each and every one of the Chafetz Chaim's conditions, but I think that what he's doing effectively is, I think in a certain sense, he's answering your question, Stephanie, which is like, what? Okay, well, I'm not a judge, or we don't have this hierarchical structure. Let me try to unpack how I can think about my responsibility in this situation. My responsibility towards the people who might be ditched if I don't speak about this person, my responsibility towards society or whatever in terms of its well-being, my responsibility towards the person itself. In this particular, your responsibility to me as someone who's committing the bad acts, and making sure that that's proportional or commensurate. And my own responsibility as someone who needs to speak and get involved directly, and to choose wisely how I get involved, and to not use lashon hara, to not use that kind of public shaming as a way out, as a shortcut for the real work of trying to prevent someone from committing those kind of acts. I will say that I think in a certain sense, maybe that penultimate condition that he teaches is, I think, maybe complicated and maybe the most relevant for us, because I think a lot of times we pass something on because that's the easy way to either help or feel like we're helping, rather than to actually engage the person directly and stop the person from doing what they're doing. Okay, I have about a minute left, so if there's a final comment or question, then now is the time. Yes, Shelley, briefly, because I want to end on time, please.
Very quickly, something that haunts me to this day. I followed the Chafetz Chaim and other things. There was someone went for a position at a bank at that time when I was with the bank many years ago. I knew that person, or I had heard that person had been fired from another position, same position, for doing something wrong. Followed the rules, went to the HR person. All I said was, I waited a couple hours. I said, when you interview people, maybe it's a good idea to check a little more deeply into their background. I didn't want to accuse it. Bottom line, guy comes to me a couple of days later. Oh, thank you so much for talking to me. I didn't hire that guy because I looked into his background. I felt great. Now, years later, I feel terrible. It haunts me. Because I followed what the Chafetz Chaim said. Don't accuse the person, just tell the person in a general way to look into everybody's background. The guy didn't get the job. It haunts me that maybe I was responsible, and maybe he would have reformed.
Right. So what I would say is the following. what I would say somewhere between a sense of satisfaction that you took that responsibility seriously and being, in other words, what I would say is, you know, as my first therapist said to me when I said, I don't know whether I made Aliyah, whether I moved to Israel because I really believe in all this stuff or because I just wanted to move far away from my family. And he said, yes, you know, both, right? In other words, you might have reason to be haunted and to feel good about yourself at the same time, meaning there is a way, I think, in which we do our best in the world and we try to conduct ourselves regarding our speech with the utmost integrity and responsibility that we can. But part of it means don't bury our heads and say, and that's what I was trying to get in the last section, which is it's complicated, meaning it's very easy, quote unquote, very easy to always say, oh, I don't want to do Lashon Hara. I don't want to embarrass someone publicly. I'll never engage in that. But there is a sense in which we have social responsibility and we have moral responsibility for creating and fashioning the society or our workplace. And so we can't simply sign out, right? And so what I would say is it's complicated, and the best that we can do, and what we have to do, I think, according to the Torah, is to take each of those responsibilities seriously. Each of those meaning our responsibility towards potential damaged people, our responsibility towards the sinner, him or herself, whom we want to protect from, you know, or prevent from doing it again, but also responsibility to a person's ability to do tshuva and to not wrongfully accuse them and to not put them through a process of pain, which is incommensurate for what they did, which often obviously happens. Okay, I have to stop here because our time is up. Thank you very, very much. Chag Chanukah, happy Hanukkah to everyone. And stay safe, please.
Thank you.
And have a good
much.
rest of
Thank
your
you.
Sunday.
Thank you. That was great.
Wonderful.
My
Mitsuyan.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Hope you all join us next month for another section of Torah from Israel, when we have Drori Yoshua. You're gonna takes us through some Sephardic sages and
Droy is my neighbor and he's amazing. Don't miss him. He's great.
really,
Really, he's great. Don't miss Droy. He's great.
Abir, what date is that?
it's January 10th.
Okay, thank you. To
Thank you, Abir.
See you
Thank
all
you
there.
so much.
Rabbi, thank you so much. Was so great.
Great.
So
Great.
nice to have
My
such
pleasure.
Fabulous.
distance between
Yeah, wonderful.
Lashon Hara and
Kelly,
Great.
I think you did the right thing.
it's great.
Thank you.
Yofi.
Solve my
Right.
problems.
Yes, cheaper than therapy.
Yeah, right.
You did the best you could.
The fault is on him, not on you.
Yeah, well, it's just that I know I was trying to follow the Chafetz Chaim's, right, who said basically you can't go out and accuse somebody if you really don't know it for a
And
fact.
you didn't. And you didn't.
But you didn't. You just made a jet. He said, I know. And I did follow it and it was great and I felt good about it. I'm still haunted about it. That's it. I'm still
Bye.
haunted.
Shavua
All right,
tov
guys.
לכולם.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
What's up?
Happy Hanukkah.